Welcome to Policy on Demand. I'm Scott McCandless. It is the week of July 24th, and this is your Monday briefing. The House and Senate are scheduled to depart at the end of this week for an August recess period. Last week, the House Ways and Means Tax Subcommittee held an international tax hearing focused on the OECD Global Tax Agreement. Janice Mays joins us to share her insights. Janice, thank you very much for being here.
Thanks for inviting me.
Always a pleasure. So let's start with that hearing. I know that the Republicans, not unexpectedly, were critical of what the OECD has been doing with Pillars 1 and specifically more on Pillar 2. But what about the administration's and the Democrats on the panel's reactions? What was their reaction and what might we take away from that?
I thought it was an interesting hearing in several aspects, but Treasury's testimony was given by Michael Plowgen, who's the Deputy Assistant Treasury Secretary for International Tax Policy. And he luckily was able to say, I wasn't that negotiator. So kind of quit beating up on me. I'm here to promise a better future. And he was able to sort of put himself a little bit behind the OECD recent announcements that made some things better for the U.S. and able to kind of claim a little credit for that and step there. But it was interesting to watch the Democrats. They were a little more mixed than the Republicans, a couple of big defenders of everything that's happened so far. But more of them were open to more negotiation with the OECD, making the thing more perfect, making it better for U.S. business. And I thought that showed a big opening for the future for business to try to go in that direction.
Now, you had mentioned that the OECD had released some guidance and that in some ways it actually had improved vis-a-vis U.S. business positions. Can you talk a little bit about where those OECD negotiations might be headed from here?
I thought it was a very interesting opening. Up until now, both the U.S. Treasury and the OECD have said no change. They said, we've agreed to this. This is what's written. This is what's going to stay. This showed change is possible. If the countries that the OECD needs to sign on have a lot of trouble with these provisions, they can be modified. So they clearly modified the treatment of transferable credits because of those new energy credits in last year's legislation. And that pleased the Democrats a lot. They also postponed that under-taxed profits rule where other countries can tax U.S. income. And that showed maybe, even though they said we'll never postpone it again, showed maybe they could think about that. I think the question going forward now is, will they do more things around the edges? Are they willing to look at some major pieces of it to please the U.S.? There are some bigger issues than this. Can the UTPR rule be pushed for longer? Can we look at credits like the R&D credits that aren't transferable? And even the bigger questions on that. What I don't know is, does the OECD now think they've planted themselves in a place where they should stay until 2025 or after 2025, when the U.S. may be changing its tax laws, when it's going to be looking at big tax legislation? I just don't know.
Sure, that makes sense. So let's bring it back to the domestic legislation front. Congress is about to go on a long August recess. When they get back, they're going to have to deal with spending ahead of the September 30th federal fiscal year end. What are the prospects for the expired tax provisions on which we've been focused for so long?
They remain still about even odds, about 50-50 at this point. They're going to be focusing on appropriations, which they've got a lot of trouble. They're going to have to get past to solve that. And sometimes that's the legislation that tax provisions ride at the end of the year. That's the vehicle that you use to do this. So not clear what's going to happen on the end of the year on that. They want to get the National Defense Authorization Bill done. They want to get the Farm Bill reauthorized and the Federal Aviation Administration Bill reauthorized. So they've got some major things they'll be focusing on. I think the immediate question in September will be, do the House Republicans try to pass the bill that they brought out of committee that extends those three legacy TCJA pieces and makes them easier for business through 2025. Would they want to pass that in the House? They'd like to, like they did the debt limit bill, makes their negotiating position stronger from their standpoint for all the negotiations for end of the year. I don't think they have to, though, and they may get bollocksed up over the SALT negotiations, that they didn't include any helping of individuals on the state and local sales deduction limitations that have been in the law since 2017. So I don't quite know where that happens, but I think we're in a good place for those leaders to begin to negotiate behind the scenes to be ready to act on those extender pieces. They wanted it done last year, both sides. It didn't get done. So now they're kind of anxious to get it done this year. We have a little Taiwan tax, not double taxing people piece of legislation that might become a little vehicle if the appropriations bills aren't there to help. So there are different ways to proceed. They've still got, though, to resolve the child tax credit. Haven't done that yet. They need those behind the scenes negotiations, getting that ready. And then I think you can queue up a bill at the end of the year. I'm optimistic, but it's not a slam dunk.
So Janice, let's kind of bring it back home for our viewers. With so much going on internationally and domestically, where should companies be focused?
Well, I think if you care about those TCJA legacy pieces, if you care about R&D expensing, about interest deduction limitations, or about bonus depreciation, staying involved with Congress is very important. Those members will be home over the August recess. If you've got a chance to visit with them at home if you're not going to come to DC. But stay engaged. There's just so much that's going to get in the way at the end of the year, social issues and appropriations and other things. Keep this at the top of their mind. And if you're an international company, you got to keep watching the OECD. We're expecting more guidance. And I think you have to start being ready for the implementation of some version of Pillar 2. So you've got to analyze all that information you don't get today that you're going to have to report suddenly and begin to build your system where you're ready for it, because whatever happens at the OECD, more disclosure, more reporting is part of the future, and you need to be getting ready now.
Makes sense. Great advice and great insights as always. Thank you so much for being with us, Janice. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
And for our viewers, in case you missed it, included in the email with this episode is the latest Week in Review with Andrew Pryor. Remember to tune in later this week for another Week in Review and a special episode on FTC guidance released by the IRS last week. Thank you as always for watching, and stay with Policy on Demand for the latest developments in Washington and around the world. Take care.